Hello. These are things you should know. Eva May, Lila, and Mildred. And I'm here to tell you. You belong to the first Florida families. And you have a double entrance too, that Solana family. Your great, three times great grandfather, Philip Francis Solana, and Bartolome Solana, both of them your great grandfathers. They were brothers. Phil was 10 years Bart's senior, and they lived on Avonlea Street, called Street of the Hospital then. Phil lived in what is known the Solana House. It was built by his dad, Don Manuel Solana. And Bart lived across the lane on Cardiff. You say Cardiz today. And both farmed, when young man, out on the Solana plantation, out near Mill Creek and Pickle out in that way. But Phil had a determined, stubborn son, Caetano, your great-great-grandfather, and mine. And he was in love with his Uncle Bart's daughter, Leoncia, his first cousin. He was called Kite, and she was called Leonie. And they had been wild for each other for years, but their dominant fathers had prevailed, and they were kept apart. While on very rare occasions, their Uncle Matthew, whom they called Tio Mateo, which is Uncle Matthew in Spanish, spoke up in their efforts to see each other and to see if he could straighten it out. Leonie's mother passed away, and that was another reason that they couldn't meet as often. And then Phil took ill, and he died in 1836. But still, Bart would not agree to a close or relative marriage. And he said to himself, it just cannot happen. Besides, he took sick, and he was bedridden for 3 years, and she had to take care of him. And finally, in 1839, Kite's mother put up no more objections, and Uncle Mateo, who was now Leonie's guardian, gave his consent. And on April the 18th, 1840, the two were finally married. Your great-grandfather was their son, Philip. Your grandmother Stella's father. And that's how we come to have the first cousins in our family. Plus my own grandmother was also their daughter. She was Philip's sister. And that's how I learned all the stories, because I learned them because people were supposed to keep them, and they don't keep stories like that. So you go into the top Solanas on both sides. Remember, you go in through Phil, and you go in through Bart. Well, now look at those first 5 Solana generations on your little chart I made you. That's my worksheet, really. If any of you know how to do things beautifully, then you should make it right. Vincent that's the top guy. We know very little about him. He was of La Villa, according to his marriage record, July the 4th, 1594. That could be La Villa in Spain, and it could be the village, too, as opposed to the town, the settlement, as it was called. They called out near La Leche, that was where they called it the village. It was originally in Indian hands. We do know that Alonso, his son, was born here in 1597 and confirmed here in 1606, when a bishop paid a visit and confirmed over 300 boys. We know that Vincent had been a soldier of the Presidio, and we know that Alonso followed his father's footsteps, certainly by obligation, because originally at 14 and 15, all the young men entered service. Alonso served the king, as they called it, meaning serving the government, for many, many years. And later in life, upon retirement, he was given an honorary title of Sargento Mayor. Now you say that looks like Sergeant Mayor, but it isn't. It's Sargento Mayor. It means principal sergeant, but it also means that you have performed services for your government, and they have now conferred upon you in your retirement this particular honorary title, and that usually it's reserved for bureaucrats. The lower class never got it. And apparently, 2 of his grandsons held the powerful job of escribano, and that's a story all in itself, how they got it. And they held it for nearly 40 years. And their brother, another of his grandsons, our maternal grandfather, your 7 times great-grandfather, was Manuel, and he became the deputy governor. prior to 1702. It was a very important political and bureaucratic family for over 70 years. Then, as it somewhat declined in prominence, the Sanchez family began to become important and grow prominent because they came in later. It was Mrs. Sanchez's family that went back to 1602. That's what you call your Sanchez connection. Well, our Don Manuel, your 4 times great-grandfather, had an eye for the ladies. Long before he wed, he had a friend who really may have been his first wife. We don't know. His history changed so rapidly. All the British documents were later taken away after the 20 years that England was here. And this is how it happened. And this is how I dug some of it out. Excuse me, I do have a lot of bronchitis. Spain owned Florida 198 years from the day of the founding in 1565 to the year 1763, when because of a European war and a treaty in Paris that gave Havana, Cuba, back to Spain in exchange for Florida to England, making the British colonies 14 instead of 13, and giving England the whole East Coast, which is what she'd like to have. Spain could not lose Havana. It was her gateway to the riches of both Mexico and South America. So in 1763, British authorities took control of San Augustine, which now were to be called British Augustine. All the Spaniards were forced to leave. Can you imagine what their feelings must have been? 200 years of their heritage buried here, and they lost it all. Some went back to Spain, some went to Cuba, others went to the islands. The Solanas, our family, went en masse, and they left for Cuba, all save Don Manuel Lorenzo Solana, our ancestor. He was ordered with 7 others to remain for a while to clear up the details, and he never left. He met, and in some sort of way formed an alliance with a British girl from London, here with her parents. She was born about 1752 from the census records later on and from death records. She had a son who died by Manuel Solana. She was baptized Catholic September 1773, and I've always wondered why he never married her then if he hadn't married her. Had another son and a daughter by Don Manuel Solana, and they lived as a family until 1779, when she left him and married John Hamley, an Englishman. And Don Manuel fell in love with what is spoken of today as that lovely Menorcan girl, and married her in a Catholic ceremony by the Menorcan priest, Father Pedro Camps, in June 1781. He reared his son by Mary Mitchell, and she took the daughter. Your Maria Dolores Solana, born in 1779, but not baptized until she fell for a Catholic man, Justo Lopez. You have to understand the situation to get the whole picture of this thing. He was alone here. The 2 other Spaniards came up later, Francisco Xavier Sanchez for one, and Lorenzo Yanez was another. And he was a young single man. He was 23 years old when all his people sailed away to Cuba. He would have been with them, but he had he not been ordered to stay for a time. This was 1763, remember, and when it came time to leave and he was free to go, he stayed on. He liked the change. He liked the people. He learned to speak English, and he translated some of the time for the British authorities, I'm sure. This is probably when he met that girl from London. She was over 21 years old at the time. It is very probable that he married her by some traveling minister. Things were so unsettled in those days, especially at first. You can tell the difference in baptismal records. It is either a child that's legitimate or a child that's natural. When they say natural, for those married that were considered to be sincerely waiting to be legalized, that happened a great many times when your husband went away to sea and never came back. But when you say just a bastardo, that was merely a pleasurable interlude above the blanket, and none of the Solanas of yours or mine ever held those words, bastardos. The British only stayed here 20 years, and then by treaty again, Spain got Florida back. Meantime, during those 20 years, the Monarchans came, 1768, and to St. Augustine in 1777, after the rebellion. It wasn't very long before the saintly Father Camp's presence in town turned Don Manuel back to his Catholic faith and his Catholic duties, and which one left the other one, I can't say. I only know that Mary Mitchell married John Hambley of the Panton Leslie banking firm, and she left the city and went out to live on St. John's River, taking her baby girl with her, while Manuel took their son Lorenzo, and 2 years later, 1781 rather, he married as a single man in the Catholic Church, and his bride was Maria de Maestri, Mary Masters. That's how you get the first Masters input to the tremendous Masters heritage. So to sum up, you go to Solana on two sides, all the way. Legal on your father's side, and what I think is going to be legal on your mother's side. How do we get to belong to that, you say to me? My mother was a Lopez. That's the very reason. Your mother's grandfather was the grandson of Maria Dolores Solana. And you ask, but how do I get to be a Sanchez that way? Your mother's grandmother was born Maria Dolores Sanchez, the famous Lola Sanchez, the Confederate spy. So what do you think of that? And to look at your chart while I'm saying this. You are Eva May and Lila and Mildred, the children of Elsie Masters. And he was the son of Estelle Solana. And we will not go back to Louis Bertie at the moment. And she was the daughter of Philip Solana. And he was the son of Caetana Solana and Leoncia Solana. And here you go up double. And Caetana was the son of Philip Francis. And Leoncia was the daughter of Bartolome Antonio. And both of these boys go right up to our Don Manuel Solana. The only reason why I am able to give any of this to you is because he stayed in St. Augustine. Well, he married, I put him twice, but I think he really married once, and it's very possible he could have married before. I'm not certain about Maria Dolores. Anyway, he goes up, from him he'll go right on up to Philip Solana and Geronimo Serrano, who married in 1736 and gave birth to him as I suppose, 7 or 8 other children. Each one of them had 4 or 5 children, you know. And Philip was the son of Antonia, the adjutant Antonia. And he married Maria de Torres, and she's supposed to be some relation to the governor here at that time. And Antonia goes up to the famous one, Manuel Solana I, the one that our Manuel was named after, his great-grandfather. He was the deputy governor, the man who served out at San Luis Rey, the man who served as a deputy to the governor and went to Cuba to get help for him in 1702 when Governor Moore of Carolina attacked St. Augustine. And he was the son of Alonso Solana II. And Alonso Solana II was the son of Alonso Solana I, the Sargento Mayor, the honorary title. He was the grandfather of 2 escribanos, as I told you, and 1 deputy governor. This was a very, very fine bureaucratic family. Professor Arnaudy often said this, that one of the finest Creole families in the country. And Alonso goes back to Vincent Solana. And now Vincent was the original one who married here July the 4th, 1594. Before I turn over and tell you your story of your grandmother Sanchez, I'll tell you that you're going to go into the Masters family 3 different ways. I marked them on the back of your chart. You'll go in through Philip, of course, Solana, married Mary Louise Masters. And naturally, she was the 4th cousin of Louis Bertie Masters, who married your grandmother, Stella. You go in the 2nd time through Bertie. And you go in the 1st time of all through Maria de Maestri, who married Manuel Solana on your other side. So you have 3 ways of entering the Masters family. The de Maestri, as they call them. You'll get that just a little later on, a little more about it. In the meantime, this is the end of this. I am delighted to be able to meet you and to do this. and I hope you get a lot of pleasure from it. Elinor Phillips Barnes, 1991. Here I am again. The Confederate Spy. During the war between the states, the so-called Civil War, 1861-1865, St. Augustine for a time was under the protection of the Confederate forces, and naturally most of the Southern citizens were very passionately patriotic. The Union Army soon occupied Jacksonville, and they sent their gunboats just sailing up and down the St. Johns River and up and down our coastline here. And in time they dispatched a force to order the surrender of St. Augustine. The town was just in an uproar. The Confederates retreated south and west, and they went across the river. There was a blockade, and foodstuffs were very scarce. Many families subsisted on one baked sweet potato per day. They even prevented them for a while from fishing. The farms and the plantations fared not too much better, as the army confiscated most of what they had for the military. Some of the residents, fearing the threatened shelling of the city, hoisted the white flag and surrendered. And it was a sheet, I think, from one of the brief front houses. It was but a temporary, peaceful surrender. The army had its hands full with the dissenting women of the community. They said the men weren't so bad, but oh my God, the women. The situation became almost hopeless at one point, and the peaceful protest had to be strictly curtailed. Thus the Union Army was distracted for months, one way and then the other. But finally those out on the plantation saw somewhat of an easing of the restrictions. And also many of the rancheros were left alone. So feeling that nothing dangerous was imminent, eventually they became warily friendly with the Yankees, and for a purpose, I can tell you. All the ranch owners had owned slaves, large and small plantations, had this cheap free help. But after the emancipation, some of those field hands ran away or left in a friendly fashion, it being the law. Others, the old faithful house servants, not knowing what to do, just stayed right on. Now the Sanchez family was one such who enjoyed the so-called friendship of the damn Yankees for a purpose. In later years, they would become a famous legend for their support of the Confederacy. Don Mauricio Sanchez, the scion of the second oldest family in the continental United States, having been born in a Spanish subject, was radically Southern bred. His great-grandfather was the formidable Don Jose Sanchez de Altagosa, about whom we have first heard in this family lineage book. Don Mauricio was the parent of several brave and very beautiful daughters who took dangerous chances to pass information to the Confederate forces across the river. So goes the legend. At least one of them did. All the descendants of the upper-class Spanish families and the American ranch owners were accustomed to week-long parties with a dozen house guests or more. The large haciendas provided all kinds of gracious service for those fortunate enough to attend. They were born entertainers, and they had barn dances and fiddle music and straw rides and horse races and boating and food, oh, such food. Longaroni stews, sausage as big as your wrist, chicken and cured ham, perlo, baked beans, tons of fried chicken. It was normal, I am told, by those who know these things, from being there as children, my uncle for one. It was very ordinary to bake 12 to 15 pies in one day. Wine flowed freely, and coffee strong enough to walk by itself was kept brewing all day on the stoves. Lola Sanchez baptized Maria Dolores after Maria Dolores Solana, and her sister Francesca, called Panchita, were the two most prominently associated with the spy legend. I think Panchita helped Lola do these things, but she was not the spy. All rode horseback. often bareback. Poor Don Mauricio. He was widowed early in life, and he exercised very little control over these headlong daughters, leaving each to the care of a faithful black nanny. But at least it gave the girls responsibility that served them very well when it became necessary to play a part. Panchita often would ride out as far as the slave quarters with Lola. But it was Lola, more often covered by her brother's clothes, but it was Lola who was considered the real Confederate espionage agent. So the girls flirted, and they fluttered, and they flattered. And the charmed officers plied, oh my, they plied them with food. They danced until dawn with them, and they welcomed the boys in blue openly, and then slyly hinted at events that were to come and how sorry they were that you wouldn't be here, and future plans and things of that kind. And meanwhile, drinking as much as they could in the innocent words of what they would have to say, often spoken without thinking. Oh, we'll be back. Don't worry, we're only going up the railway. Every item to pass on later to the Confederates. When at last the exhausted officers were asleep, Lola would don her brother's clothes, ride the wind to the river on Patsy, canoe it across, and meet a Confederate outrider, and be taken to secret headquarters, and where she revealed all that she knew, often bringing them delicacies and food that were left after the soldiers went to bed, that the poor Southerners had never had. As she was escorted back to the river by a scout who would row her across the river, and then finding Patsy, she would gallop wildly to reach the fields where she knew that Panchita would meet her. Well, here the two girls would meet, and she'd hurriedly, in a little, what we would call a garage today, probably a wood house, she would change her clothes, and stealthily they would come back in the back way and go up the stairs and fall into bed utterly exhausted. Yet bright and clear-eyed she was the next morning, when the others would come down for a heavy breakfast, again watchfully picking up clues from the men's conversation. In this manner, the boys in gray stayed just out of reach of the men in blue. It was risky. There were others that aided the cause, but none that achieved the rank of Lola Sanchez. After many months of this, with rumors and suspicions unproved, Don Mauricio Sanchez was taken to the Union headquarters of all places in the world for questioning. I understand at one point Mr. Sanchez was kept in our old fort, the great Castillo de San Marcos, where his charming, indignant daughters faced the commandant and gave him you-know-what, and with such denials that he was finally let go. It is said that much later, when every Confederate boat passed their place at a later time, a salute would be given to the Sanchez ranchero. Lola was a legend for years, a very real lady, a devoted native daughter of the ancient city, who wed Manuel Lopez June the 1st, 1868, and she was the grandmother of many of my friends. And she was your grandmother. She was Eugene's mother, and Eugene is your father. That is how you get to be a complete Alvarez-Sanchez. It's a wonderful heritage, girls, and one that you should be very proud of, and one that I am absolutely delighted to bring to you. I hope in time to come that I will be able to do the Andrews for you, and the O'Haras. You got as much on both sides, Andrew and O'Hara, as you have on these two. I'll be giving you a little bit of the Masters in just a few seconds. I want to finish this off by saying that you are, without a doubt, proven and documented direct descendants of the two oldest families in the country. Now we'll talk about the de Maistres for a moment. It began in Minorca in Alioa. Martin de Maistre and his wife, Juana, that would be Jane today. Remember that J is like you say J-U-A-N, is one, like W almost. And remember when you see J-O-S-E, it is not Josie, it's Jose, because that's like an H. Remember that in Spanish. I is E, E is A, and A is A. That's why we have that long sound, Solana. It's a beautiful way to say it, Solana. Martin de Maistre had a son, Bartholomew, who married in 1597 over there. And he had a son, Bartholomew, too, the second, who married in 1641, was born in 1609. And then he had a son by the name of Francisco. And Francisco had one by the name of Pedro de Maistre. And they always used the little DA until they got down to St. Augustine. Then they stripped, that was stripped away from. Bartholomew then was the third. He married Antonia Rogera, and that's the family that came to St. Augustine. In fact, she even died here. I would like you to have that whole family one day, which I shall get for you. Then there's Pedro de Maistre, who married Maria Andrew. And there's another family you are eligible for. It goes right back to 1550. It's a good one. And I like it because you're going to find in that one that infamous, I wouldn't say that adorable little Maria Angela Cole. And then Pedro de Maistre was the brother of Mrs. Manuel Solana, so you go in there doubly. Then Pedro's son Antonio the first married Matilda Pinella, and then his grandson Antonio the second married Agarda Ponce, and that brought into the world Louis Bertie Masters. So you see, Louis Bertie Masters is your grandfather, and he was Stella's husband. And that was the first time you went into the Masters was through Philip. And the second time was through Maria de Maistre, who married Manuel Solana. And the third time, now you go back again through Louis Bertie Masters. So you enter, please notice there'll be stars by it. You enter the Masters family that many times. You are truly a de Maistre, truly a Solana, and truly an Alvarez-Sanchez. One of these days when you come back and we see you again, I'm going to hope that you will know as much about this as I do. I want you to. I want you to take these charts and have them made Xerox copies, and then copy, each one of you make one. Make a nice one for yourself, and be careful when you draw your lines to keep the lines spaced as I have them here. It will help you to arrive together at proper marriage and so forth. The ones who meld with the other, the unions between you. You have to be careful about that. Someday, if you will bring the large folders here, I will draw the lines for you. But then I would like you to get somebody to do it, and do it nicely so you'll be proud to show it. I believe that with that, this is the end of the things you should know. Remember that if it hadn't been for Don Manuel Lorenzo Solana staying in St. Augustine and having an alliance with a British woman and then marrying Maria de Maistre, we would never have all of this at all. We would never been able to even cross through that period. Remember, I always remember, if it wouldn't have been for Virginia Wilson, we would have never had this at all. Because I was a young woman just married when she wrote from in the late 1920s, about 29 I think it was, when she wrote from Miami and asked Monsignor Noonan, the Vicar General, if he knew Mr. Ansel Phillips, that she thought he was a Solana, and she would like very much to get the background on her family. She is from Bartholomew's family as well. So there's so much of you, that so much in your blood that is in the blood of so many others, so many closely related to this. And again, I would never have been able to do without Earl. I was very close to your father's brother. He was a very nice person. I never was close to Joe till much later, but I wouldn't have missed it for $100,000. She's one of the best friends I've got right now. So, my dears, have a ball, a confused ball reading this. Don't let it throw you. Remember to stop and think. Follow the arrow. Follow the arrow. Follow the arrow. Remember that. I've tried to make it clear for you. If you have any questions, I'm as close as your telephone. Or come back again. And don't say to me, oh, what can I give you for this? You can't. Nobody can give me anything. This is mine to give. and gladly do I give it to you. I hope I'll be able to have numbers of you, and I am right now having tremendous satisfaction with numbers of you coming back to say you've brought our family so much pleasure. To be remembered like that will be something. You just remember to pray for me.